Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and as we say in my mother tongue, Ta'ala Falava. I am very honored and very grateful as a young Pacific Island woman to have been given this opportunity to present in this panel, and greatest thanks to the organizers of this session. As you could see, we are all here for the same purpose, and we're fighting for the same cause, but of course we all have different realities, and I will try my best to share with you the reality of my Pacific region. So just briefly, countries in the South Pacific belong to three main groups: Polynesia, where I'm from, and then we have the Melanesian groups of Pacific Islands, and then we also have Micronesian groups of Pacific Island countries. According to statistics from 2010, the populations of individual Pacific Island countries vary from 12,000 to 5.2 million. And in terms of women make up 49% of the population, of which 56% are young women below age 25. I believe we would all agree that the well-being of any society is influenced by the welfare of women. And I also believe that in most Pacific Island countries, the welfare and the well-being of families and communities depend heavily on women, specifically in regards to caregiving, which mostly evolves around looking after children and elders, and that's because it's an expectation of serving the family good. And this is something that sets us different from the Western culture. For instance, young people do not move out of their parents' homes or out of their families' homes when it's time to go to university, or even when they get jobs. And elders, on the other hand, remain within the care of their families until they pass. With this system, our roles are very gendered, and the roles of men are mostly circled around leadership. As for women, it's mostly around care work and caregiving. On the other hand, men and women have different levels of access to resources such as land and so forth. So for example, for where I'm from Samoa, you would need to be a chief to have access to resources such as land and your family heritage. Although family task of caregiving is a shared responsibility between both men and women, it is more heavily seen to be the woman's role. And what enforces these gender norms are churches, and because even churches are heavily patriarchal systems as well, and unfortunately even our national legal and constitutional instruments support such systems of patriarchy. The majority of women in the Pacific Islands are engaged in informal and subsistence activities as part of nurturing, reciprocity, and service to their families and communities. Very often when we talk about care work, we tend to think about it in relations to volunteering work, domestic roles, including informal and subsistent activities and so forth. In terms of specifically caring for members or for a member or members of the family, it is at the core of unpaid work in the Pacific. This, I mean, that all the informal and subsistence unpaid work, it serves for the purpose of caregiving, looking after the children and elders of the family. Apparently, the caregiver is not regarded as a worker. With caregiving, it is mostly mothers and even young women and girls that stay home from their jobs or education to care for the sick, for instance. But don't get me wrong, in my country, Samoa, young people, young girls, and even women are encouraged by their families to go to school and to get jobs. And families do recognize the importance of education and employment. However, in situations of emergency, such as a family member getting sick, it will always be the female that is preferable to stay behind to care. My dad's youngest sister has 7 children and is raised by my grandmother up till now. 3 of them being girls, with the eldest being 14. So my grandfather is now 83 and is in a wheelchair. And if he gets sick, which is most of the time, my 14-year-old cousin would be the one staying home to help out the grandmother with all the chores, plus looking after my grandfather. And if the more she stays back to look after my sick grandfather, this takes her time off from school, lowering her chances of doing well in school, which would affect her in terms of getting into a good college. And given our education systems in Samoa, you need a certain grade to move throughout the different levels, especially with English language or English subject. And then you also need to have a certain grade to get into the first level of foundation. When you get to foundation, that's where the scholarship opportunities are, depending on your on grades. So many young people drop out from this level in search of, from the level foundation, in search of jobs to provide for their families. So why am I sharing this? It's because even care work or caregiving now, especially in regards to young people, can impact on their future. I know of young females or young girls who are not going to school anymore or have stopped working just to care for an elder. I also know of young women who have fallen pregnant during high school or even during our foundation level and have stayed home to look up, because the general perception in Samoa and in many Pacific Island countries that once a girl gets pregnant, you are now seen as an adult and you are obliged to the roles of motherhood and caregiving. So not only will they care for their child, but they will also care for their elders and members of the family. So caregivers are often not considered as workers, nor is their unpaid work recognized and valued in the socioeconomic development. There's no international human rights framework that offers caregivers protection, and that's something we want to see happen. According to a paper done on economic crisis and unpaid work in the Pacific has no access to or entitlement from central or local government social support resources for people involved in full-time unpaid care work. And in our villages, you'll mostly see the middle-aged and elderly women at home taking part in full-time care work. Unpaid care workers have no human rights protections in the Pacific Islands that are still very strongly rooted in their traditional practices and values and beliefs. Human rights is still a sensitive and controversial issue. Hence, as women and young girls, we are vulnerable to some of our traditional practices, or even some of these traditional practices would hinder us from our rights to attend education and so forth. For example, a friend of mine in Papua New Guinea, which is a country in the Melanesian group of countries, shared with me that young girls in their villages do not go to school because the opportunities are given to the boys first, because the girl's role is to stay home and look after the family. And even in Samoa, I would need a chief title to have an equal status with the man. And when it comes to chief and care work, it's mostly in regards to care work decision-making and leadership roles in care work. So I would like to conclude with some recommendations highlighting 3 main points. The first being that human rights should be as the center to all development, hence the need for women's rights. So make the lives of caregivers easier by providing adequate programs to access information, drinkable water, improved sanitation, access to health care, especially SRHR, food and support networks, and of course full access to education and access to social and political avenues. So in the case of the Pacific, having full participation in traditional decision making such as village councils. Secondly is in regards to social protection, the need for progressive state policies to protect all women throughout their life cycle. We had a 12th Triennial Conference of Pacific Women, which was held just last year in October. And it called for governments to consider social protection measures for all women, including but not limited to women with disabilities, older women, women living with HIV, STIs, young girls, and so forth. And additionally, it's important that we have temporary special measures and appropriate strategies created to increase political and public participation and representation for all women. And lastly, I would like to end off with the Voice of Young Pacific Women, which is also during the Triennial Conference. Last year they suggested 5 key strategic recommendations. First, eliminating sexual gender-based violence, ensuring sexual and reproductive health and rights, eliminating all forms of discrimination against persons with disabilities, promoting full and decent employment and economic empowerment for young women, and ensuring full participation of young women at all levels of decision making. So each of these recommendations must be considered in both productive and reproductive prospects, and ensuring that unpaid care work and caregiving is embraced and incorporated as a vital aspect in addressing all issues of young women in the Pacific. Thank you.